It all started with the bushes. Or, more accurately, it all started with what the president of my homeowners association thought my bushes looked like. Before the letters, before the late-night stakeouts and the police interventions, there was just me, a pair of electric shears, and my blissfully ignorant Saturday mornings. Saturday was my sanctuary. The rest of the week, I was Leo Maxwell, graphic designer, a guy who pushed pixels around a screen to make corporate logos look 2% more synergistic. My world was one of hex codes and client feedback, a digital realm where I was a hired gun for good taste. But on Saturday, I was a god. A minor, suburban god, sure, but a god nonetheless. My kingdom was a modest quarter-acre of meticulously manicured turf in the oppressively beige subdivision of Maple Creek Estates. My subjects were the azaleas, the petunias, and my pride and joy, two massive boxwood topiaries I'd dubbed the Intertwined. They were my masterpieces. For 3 years, I had coaxed them from unruly green blobs into something resembling art. One was a smooth, flowing teardrop shape, plump at the bottom and tapering to a delicate point. The other was a perfect crescent that curved around it, a protective arm holding its partner in a gentle, leafy embrace. To me, they were abstract and beautiful. They represented harmony, connection. A silent green ampersand in a world full of exclamation points. The particular Saturday morning was perfect. The air was cool, the sun was warm, and my indie rock playlist was hitting that sweet spot between chill and motivating. I was giving the crescent a little trim, humming along, my shears buzzing a happy counter-melody. This was my zen. The precise snip of the blades, the clean, earthy smell of cut boxwood, the satisfaction of a perfect curve. In this moment, nothing could touch me. Then I saw her. Brenda Shankman, president for life of the Maple Creek HOA, was on her morning power walk. Brenda didn't just walk. She attacked the pavement. She wore a neon pink visor pulled down so low it was a miracle she hadn't walked headfirst into a fire hydrant yet. Her matching tracksuit was so tight it looked shrink-wrapped onto her wiry frame. As she approached my house, her relentless pace slowed, her head turning with the stiff, robotic motion of a security camera. Her gaze, sharp enough to curdle milk from 50 paces, landed on the Intertwined. Her lip curled. It wasn't a smile or a frown. It was a complex expression of disgust, judgment, and the dawning, horrific realization that something in her perfectly ordered universe was askew. I, being a friendly and naive idiot, paused my shears and gave her a little wave. Brenda did not wave back. She picked up her pace, her sneakers pounding the asphalt with renewed fury, as if she could physically stomp out the offense she had just witnessed. I shrugged and went back to my work. Abstract art isn't for everyone, I thought, blissfully unaware that I hadn't just been judged by an art critic. I'd been targeted by an inquisitor. The gauntlet, unbeknownst to me, had been thrown. My zen was about to be violated. Living in an HOA-controlled neighborhood is like having a roommate you can't get rid of, who doesn't pay rent, but who leaves you passive-aggressive notes about the way you load the dishwasher. My landlords were a three-headed Cerberus of suburban tyranny. Brenda, of course, and her two loyal lieutenants, Gary Peterman and Carol Littman. I'd managed to fly under their radar for 2 years, but I was starting to realize the radar was now sweeping my property with the intensity of a prison searchlight. My first real introduction to the board's particular brand of madness came courtesy of Gary Peterman and my neighbor Dave's lawn. I was at my desk, trying to convince a client that a font called Papyrus was not a good choice for their tech startup's logo, when I saw the drama unfold. Gary, a man whose body seemed to be composed entirely of disappointed sighs and tweed, was on his hands and knees in Dave's yard. In his hand, he held a tape measure. He meticulously measured a single blade of fescue, held it up to the light, and shook his head with the profound sadness of a doctor delivering bad news. He jotted something down on a clipboard, stood up with a geriatric grunt, and slid a piece of paper under Dave's doormat. Later, I saw Dave over the fence. He looked like a man who had just been audited by the IRS. He said my fescue blend was a 1/4 inch over regulation height, Dave said, his voice a hollow whisper. 1/4 inch, Leo. He issued me a warning citation. It looks like a parking ticket from my own damn lawn. Did you ask him if he needed to borrow a tiny violin to play while he wrote it? I asked. Don't joke, Dave said, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of Gary. He'd probably find me for unapproved musical instruments under Bylaw 14, Section G. If Gary was the blunt instrument of the HOA, Carol Littman was the poisoned dart. She was the secretary, a woman who weaponized gossip and baked it into Jell-O salads for the neighborhood potluck. She stopped by my porch the next day, a flyer in hand, her smile as wide and thin as a razor blade. "Oh, Leo, hello," she chirped, her eyes not looking at me but at the intertwined behind me. "Just dropping this off. We're doing a potluck for the summer kickoff. I'm making my famous ambrosia salad." "Sounds gelatinous," I said. "Thanks, Carol." "Of course. You know, I was just saying to Brenda the other day, your garden is just so expressive." The word hung in the air, dripping with insinuation. It takes a real brave person to put something so, personal right out on the front lawn for everyone to see. "Thanks, Carol," I said, forcing a smile. "I was going for brave." "Bless your heart," she said, delivering the classic Southern coup de grace. "Well, don't let Brenda hear you say that. You know how she is about shapes." She gave my bushes one last, lingering look before trotting off, her mission of planting unease accomplished. I stood there on my porch, the flyer for a potluck feeling more like a summons. They were closing in. Gary measured my blades, Carol judged my shapes, and Brenda was the final boss. I had a sinking feeling I was about to be called into her office. It arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a coupon for a discount oil change and a Pottery Barn catalog. The envelope was thick, cream-colored cardstock, bearing the self-important crest of the Maple Creek Estates Architectural Review Committee, a stuffy-looking eagle clutching a picket fence in its talons. Just holding it felt like being handed a subpoena. I slid it open with a kitchen knife, my heart doing a nervous little tap dance against my ribs. The letter inside was a masterpiece of the form, a symphony of passive-aggressive jargon that must have taken Brenda a full weekend to compose with her thesaurus. It began politely enough. "Dear Mr. Maxwell." But the pleasantries ended there. It went on to inform me that a formal review of my property, Lot 112, had been conducted. It cited Bylaw 12, Section C, a dense paragraph concerning the preservation of community aesthetic harmony and the prevention of visual discord. And then came the kill shot. It has been determined that the sculpted shrubbery located on the north side of your property, henceforth referred to as the structures, are in violation of said bylaw. The abstract and interlocking nature of the structures has been deemed inappropriate and suggestive in nature, thereby creating a source of visual discord. I read the sentence again, and a third time, inappropriate and suggestive in nature. My brain short-circuited. I walked out my front door, the letter clutched in my hand, and stood on the lawn, staring at my beloved topiaries. I squinted. I tilted my head. I walked across the street and looked at them from a new angle. What in the hell were they seeing? After a solid minute of intense horticultural analysis, I could only come to one conclusion. If you were a deeply repressed individual with the imagination of a 14-year-old boy, You could, maybe, if you tried really hard, interpret my beautiful harmonious sculptures as something vaguely phallic, my elegant teardrop and its loving crescent companion reduced to a cheap shrub-based dick joke. The letter concluded with a chilling ultimatum. I had 14 calendar days to rectify the violation. My approved options were to either remove the structures entirely or retrim them into a standard, non-offensive geometric shape. For example, sphere, cube. A cube. They wanted me to turn my art into a cube. The sheer, beige audacity of it sent a hot spike of rage through me. I stalked back inside and immediately called the one person who would appreciate the full absurdity of the situation. My sister, Sarah. "You will not believe this," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "The HOA just sent me a cease and desist letter for my bushes." I read her the offending passage. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a snort, and then the unmistakable sound of Sarah absolutely losing her mind. She was wheezing, gasping for air between fits of hysterical laughter. "They think your bushes are porn?" she finally managed to choke out. "Apparently, they called them suggestive. Sarah, they're bushes. They look like a fancy comma and its best friend." "Oh my God, Leo," she cackled. "This is the most suburban problem I have ever heard. It's amazing. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I grumbled, pacing my kitchen. "Trim them into a cube? The most boring, soulless, artistically bankrupt shape known to man? It feels like a surrender. It's like they want to sand off every interesting edge in the world until everything is smooth and round and beige." "Well, don't do that," she said, her laughter subsiding into a simmer. "You have to fight this. Or you could just comply." I could hear the grin in her voice. Comply in the most annoying, technically by-the-rules way possible. Her words hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. Comply in the most annoying way possible. I stopped pacing. I looked down at the letter in my hand, at the 3 names neatly printed at the bottom. Brenda Shankman, President, Gary Peterman, Treasurer, Carol Littman, Secretary. Then I looked out the window at my 2 inappropriate bushes. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. An idea, terrible and beautiful and utterly insane, began to bloom in the fertile soil of my indignation. They wanted me to retrim my shrubs? Fine. Oh, I would retrim them. I would comply so hard they wouldn't know what hit them. Sleep was not on the agenda that night. My mind was a fireworks display of petty, glorious revenge. I fired up my work computer, pushed aside the logo designs for a dental firm, and opened a fresh file in Photoshop. The beige tyrants of Maple Creek wanted compliance? I would give them compliance. I would give them art. My art. The plan unfurled in my head, a beautiful, intricate blueprint of spite. There were 3 of them, Brenda, Gary, and Carol. The unholy trinity of the Architectural Review Committee, but I only had 2 main topiaries, a problem, but not an insurmountable one. My gaze drifted to the window, to the large, unruly privet hedge that ran along the edge of my driveway. It was a shapeless green blob I'd always meant to deal with. It had just found its purpose in life. It was destined to become Gary. His jowly disapproval would be the first thing I saw when I pulled out of my garage every morning, a monument to his own mediocrity. The 2 boxwoods, my beloved intertwined, would be reborn. The taller, more elegant teardrop was perfect for Brenda's perpetual scowl and her shellacked helmet of hair. The crescent, with its slight, curving posture, was practically begging to be shaped into Carol's condescending head tilt. It was perfect, a triptych of suburban misery, rendered in living chlorophyll, but I wouldn't just make caricatures. No, that was too simple. I was a designer, a man of detail. I would create portraits. I would capture the precise angle of Brenda's sneer. I would render every last one of Gary's disappointed forehead wrinkles. I would immortalize the smarmy, two-faced glint in Carol's eye. To do that, I needed reference material. High-quality, detailed reference material. My mission, should I choose to accept it, was to become a spy in my own neighborhood. A small voice of reason in the back of my head piped up. "Leo, this is insane. You're a 34-year-old man who is about to declare a secret war on a group of retirees using garden shears. Maybe just trim the bushes into spheres and move on with your life." I told the voice to shut up. Sanity was a small price to pay for this level of satisfaction. This wasn't just about bushes anymore. It was about artistic integrity. It was about pushing back against the tide of beige conformity that threatened to wash over the world. It was about justice. Okay, mostly it was about being really, really petty. But justice sounded better. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. Before I could launch my guerrilla gardening campaign, I had to lull the enemy into a false sense of security. I drafted a response to their letter, laying on the corporate jargon as thick as mulch. "Dear Architectural Review Committee, thank you for your letter dated October 6th. I was dismayed to learn that my topiaries were causing a lack of community aesthetic harmony. Please be assured I take this matter very seriously, and I appreciate the committee bringing this oversight to my attention. I have already begun the process of rectifying the violation, and will be undertaking a significant resculpting project to bring my landscaping into full compliance with HOA bylaws. I am confident that the new design will be to everyone's satisfaction and will contribute positively to the visual fabric of our wonderful community. Sincerely, Leo Maxwell, 112 Blossom Lane." I read it over. Visual fabric of our wonderful community. I nearly gagged. It was perfect. I attached it to an email, took a deep breath, and clicked send. The little whoosh sound from my speakers felt like the firing of a starting pistol. There was no going back now. The war for Blossom Lane had officially begun. I felt a giddy, terrifying thrill. This was, without a doubt, the stupidest and most brilliant thing I had ever done. To create a masterpiece, an artist needs a muse. I needed 3. And to capture their essence, I needed to observe them in their natural habitat. My iPhone camera wasn't going to cut it. I needed details. So I dusted off my old DSLR, a relic from a college photography class, and attached the biggest telephoto lens I owned. I suddenly felt less like a graphic designer and more like a KGB agent on a deep cover assignment. My codename, The Gardener. My mission, Operation Shrub-tographer. Phase 1 took me to the last place on Earth I ever wanted to be, an HOA meeting. It was held in the community center's multi-purpose room, a soul-crushingly beige space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and broken dreams. I took a seat in the back, opened my tablet, and pretended to be a diligent, note-taking homeowner. In reality, I was sketching. Brenda was in her element, standing at a lectern using a laser pointer to highlight sections of a PowerPoint presentation titled Holiday Decoration Guidelines, a Proactive Approach to Festive Compliance. As you can see from Section 4, inflatable snowmen are limited to a maximum height of 6 feet, she droned, her voice a monotone buzzsaw of authority. All holiday lighting must be pure white, no multicolor, and absolutely no blinking or chasing patterns, which fall under the category of visual nuisance. While she lectured on the evils of festive cheer, I was capturing the rigid set of her jaw, the way her hair formed a perfect, unmoving dome. Gary sat beside her, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, occasionally nodding in agreement. Carol was on the other side, scribbling minutes, But every so often she'd lean over and whisper something to Brenda, cupping her hand over her mouth. I got a perfect sketch of that pose, the conspiratorial gossip. This was gold. Phase 2 required more subtlety. Gary was a creature of habit. Every afternoon at 4:30 p.m., he would emerge from his house to inspect his petunias. This became my new jogging time. I'd put on my running gear, slide my phone into an armband, and do slow, meandering laps around the cul-de-sac. As I passed his house, I'd pretend to be fiddling with my playlist, but I was actually snapping bursts of photos. He was a surprisingly expressive subject. There was the disappointed in a weed scowl, the suspicious of a neighbor's mailbox squint, and my personal favorite, the contemplating the inadequacy of the world sigh. On my third lap one day, he looked up suddenly. I had to execute a clumsy, flailing dive behind a parked Prius, pretending to stretch my hamstring. I think he saw me, but I couldn't be sure. The risk was part of the thrill. The motherlode, the grand prize of my espionage, came at the annual summer kickoff potluck. It was the perfect hunting ground. My targets were distracted, mingling, their guards down. I arrived bearing a 7-layer dip as my cover and my DSLR with the telephoto lens. Getting into nature photography, I announced cheerfully to anyone who asked, trying to capture the local fauna. They didn't need to know the fauna I was interested in was of the bipedal, busybody variety. I got incredible shots. There was Carol, standing by the dessert table, whispering to another neighbor while looking directly at a third, a perfect capture of her two-faced nature. There was Gary, measuring the distance between the serving platters on the main table with his pocket tape measure. And then, the shot of a lifetime. Brenda was standing over the deviled eggs, her face a thundercloud. She had clearly discovered some culinary infraction, a breach of potluck protocol. Her lips were pursed into a thin line of utter contempt. Her eyes were narrowed with the fury of 1,000 suns. Someone, somewhere, had used paprika instead of the regulation chili powder, and Brenda was not having it. I zoomed in, adjusted the focus, and click. I checked the image on the camera's display. It was perfect. The lighting, the expression, the sheer, unadulterated suburban rage. It was the Mona Lisa, my Mona Lisa. This would be the centerpiece of her leafy likeness. I packed up my camera, my mission a resounding success. I had my references. Now I just needed to find a sculptor worthy of the material. I spent the next 2 days hunched over my tablet, turning my spy photos into detailed, multi-angle sculpting guides. I mapped out the contours of Brenda's face, the precise topography of Gary's jowls. I was the Michelangelo of malice, and these were my Sistine Chapel blueprints. But there was one problem. I can design a logo that can bring a grown man to tears, but my 3D sculpting skills were limited to making slightly lopsided snowmen. My topiaries were abstract for a reason. To pull off realistic human portraits, I needed more than just a vision. I needed a master, a contractor, a hedge wizard. My search began online. Artistic landscapers, topiary specialists, custom shrub sculpting. The results were uninspiring. My first consultation was with a cheerful guy named Stan, whose entire portfolio consisted of animals. "I can do you a lovely poodle," he offered, looking at my giant boxwoods. "Or a family of ducks. Ducks are very popular." I explained I was looking for something more humanoid. Stan looked horrified. "Oh no, I don't do people. The eyes always come out wrong. Very creepy." The second guy was a minimalist who wanted to charge me $800 to trim everything into perfect spheres. He was, in effect, the physical embodiment of the HOA's letter. I thanked him for his time and showed him the door before I said something I'd regret. I was beginning to lose hope. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe I should just give up and buy a couple of garden gnomes. Then, scrolling through a local gardening forum, I saw it. A cryptic minimalist ad in the classified section. Got a weird hedge? I'm your guy. Art. There was just a phone number. No website, no portfolio. It was either a scam or exactly what I was looking for. I dialed the number. A low, gravelly voice answered after 2 rings. Art. Hi, I stammered. I saw your ad. I have a weird hedge situation. Kid, the voice rumbled. Everybody's got a weird hedge situation. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up. An hour later, a beat-up but clean pickup truck rolled up to my curb. It was a pleasant, earthy shade of forest green. A man who looked like he was carved from a redwood tree got out. He had to be in his late 60s, with a long gray ponytail, a weathered face, and hands that looked like they could wrestle a tree stump into submission. This was Arturo, or Art, as he introduced himself. I led him to the backyard, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. I took a deep breath. Okay, I began. So here's the deal. My HOA is run by a committee of tyrants. They sent me this letter. I handed him the document. He read it, a small smile playing on his lips. Ah, the inappropriate and suggestive clause. Classic Shankman, he grunted. You know Brenda? Kid, everyone in the landscaping business in this county knows about Brenda Shankman. She once tried to find me because my truck was a non-conforming shade of commercial green. I had to show her the manufacturer's paint code. This was a good sign. The enemy of my enemy. So, I continued, pulling out my tablet, they want me to trim my topiaries into something standard. I've decided to comply. I swiped to the first image, my detailed blueprint of Brenda's face, mapped onto my boxwood. This is my proposed new design. Art was silent. He looked from the tablet to the bush, then back to the tablet. He stroked his chin. I held my breath, sweat trickling down my back. I half expected him to laugh in my face and leave. He slowly swiped to the next image. Carol. Then to the third. Gary, planned for the privet hedge. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, just looking, a strange look in his eyes. Finally, a slow, magnificent grin spread across his face, cracking his weathered features like sun-baked earth after a rain. So let me get this straight, he said, his voice a low rumble of amusement. You want to immortalize the 3 dragons of Maple Creek in living chlorophyll? That's the idea, I said, my voice barely a squeak. He let out a short, sharp laugh. Kid, this isn't a landscaping job. This is a commission. This is art. He looked at me, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous light. I'm in, but my genius ain't cheap, and we work at night. Our conspiracy began the following night. Just after 10 o'clock, Art's truck glided to a silent stop at my curb. He had an impressive array of quiet, battery-powered tools that wouldn't wake the neighbors. Together, we erected a massive framework of PVC pipes around my front yard and draped it with heavy, dark tarps. From the street, my house now looked like it was under quarantine for some rare, aggressive form of mildew. Behind the tarps, it was our secret open-air studio. A couple of strategically placed work lights cast long, dramatic shadows, turning the yard into a stage. I was the artistic director. Art was the master sculptor. I stood with my tablet, projecting the reference photos onto the side of my garage, while Art, armed with a pair of electric shears, made the first tentative cuts. Our dynamic clicked into place almost immediately. We were a 2-man team of horticultural assassins, speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones. The nostrils on Brenda need to be more flared, I'd whisper, zooming in on the reference photo. Right now, she looks mildly displeased. We need her to look like she just smelled spoiled milk." "Got it. Flaring nostrils," Art would murmur, his shears buzzing with surgical precision. A few moments later, a shower of tiny green leaves would fall, and the scowl would deepen. "How about Gary? I feel like his jowls aren't conveying enough existential disappointment." "You're right," I'd say, pulling up a picture from the potluck. "The corner of the mouth needs to droop at least another 15 degrees. We need him to look like he just found a dandelion in his prize-winning rosebush." We were a week into the project, and Brenda's face was beginning to emerge from the boxwood, a ghastly, leafy death mask of disapproval, when we had our first visitor. A beam of a high-powered flashlight cut through the darkness, followed by a sharp, commanding voice. "Maxwell, what is the meaning of this?" It was Brenda. Of course it was Brenda. She was marching across my lawn in a silk robe and slippers, her face a mask of righteous indignation. She must have seen the glow from our work lights from her window down the street. I quickly stepped out from behind the tarp, positioning myself to block her view of our work in progress. "Evening, Brenda," I said, my voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. "Beautiful night for it, huh?" "Don't you evening Brenda me," she snapped, her flashlight beam dancing around my face. "It is 11:15 p.m. You are in direct violation of Bylaw 8, Section F, regarding excessive landscape noise after dusk." "Ah, but I'm not," I said, gesturing vaguely towards the tarps. "Using all electric tools, quieter than a cricket. I checked. Just trying to comply with your other notice. You know, the one about my inappropriate shrubs. It's a big project, and I want to get this rectification done well before the deadline you so graciously provided." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you doing back there? What are you building?" "It's a surprise," I said with a smile that I hoped looked more pleasant than conspiratorial. "But I assure you, the final result will be 100% geometrically appropriate and in full harmony with the community aesthetic." She wasn't buying it. She tried to step around me to peek behind the tarp. Just as she did, Art, with the quick thinking of a seasoned professional, accidentally knocked over a large plastic bucket. It clattered loudly on the driveway. "Whoops!" he called out from behind the curtain. "Butterfingers!" The noise startled Brenda. She shot the tarp a dirty look, then turned her glare back to me. "See that you're finished by the deadline, Maxwell," she hissed, before turning on her heel and marching back into the darkness. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We were safe for now. But we were on the clock, and the dragon was awake. Apparently, a large, mysteriously illuminated tent appearing on a suburban lawn every night is enough to get the neighborhood watch buzzing. Brenda's suspicion must have metastasized, spreading through the community grapevine, which was tended exclusively by Carol Littman. A few nights after our run-in with Brenda, just as Art was delicately carving the condescending smirk onto Carol's leafy doppelganger, the soft glow of our work lights was overpowered by the strobing red and blue of a police car. It rolled up to the curb silently, a predator in the quiet suburban jungle. 2 officers emerged. One was young, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and an eager posture. I'd later learn this was Officer Miller. The other was older, with a mustache that had clearly seen things and a deep, profound air of weariness that suggested he'd responded to one too many calls about stolen garden gnomes. This was Officer Davis. They walked up my driveway, their flashlights cutting sharp paths through the darkness. Art and I put down our tools and stepped out from behind the tarps, our hands raised in a gesture of peaceful, shrub-trimming compliance. "Evening, folks," Officer Davis said, his voice as tired as his posture. He gestured vaguely at our shrouded setup. "Got a call about, suspicious gardening?" "Evening, officers," I said, trying to sound as normal as possible for a man caught sculpting his enemies out of bushes at midnight. "No cause for alarm, just a little late-night landscaping. My associate Art and I are on a tight deadline." "A deadline," Officer Miller repeated, his brow furrowed with confusion. "For trimming bushes?" "A very important one," I said, nodding gravely. "From the Homeowners Association." A flicker of understanding, or perhaps pity, crossed Officer Davis's face. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sigh of a man who has witnessed the very peak of suburban pettiness and was not impressed. "All right, well, your neighbors are a little spooked. Mind if we take a look at what you're doing back there?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, game over. We were going to get arrested for... what, exactly? Aggravated horticulture? Art and I exchanged a panicked look. We had no choice. "Of course, officer," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Right this way." We led them behind the tarp. The scene that greeted them was surreal. The half-finished, eerily lit faces of the HOA board stared out from the darkness. Carol was mid-smirk. Brenda's angry forehead was fully formed. But the centerpiece, illuminated in the direct glow of our main work light, was the nearly completed head of Gary Peterman, his jowls just beginning to take shape in the unruly privet hedge. Officer Miller's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, then closed. A small, strangled sound, halfway between a cough and a laugh, escaped his lips. He quickly disguised it by inspecting the extension cord. Officer Davis, however, was a rock. He stared, deadpan, at the leafy visage of Gary Peterman for a solid 10 seconds. His mustache didn't even twitch. He shone his flashlight on it, then on Brenda, then on Carol. Finally, he turned back to me, his expression unreadable. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, this is Car 54, he said, his voice a flat monotone. "Regarding the suspicious activity at 112 Blossom Lane, situation is under control. It appears to be a horticultural dispute. Cancel the backup." He clicked the radio off and looked at me, then at Art. A tiny, almost imperceptible glint appeared in his tired eyes. "Look," he said, "as long as you're not sacrificing goats back here or using a gas-powered chainsaw, I don't really care what you do. Just try to keep the noise down and, for the love of God, turn off these lights by midnight so I don't have to come back." He turned to leave, his partner Miller following close behind, still visibly shaking with suppressed laughter. As they got back in their car, I heard Miller finally let it out. "A horticultural dispute? Seriously?" The car pulled away, leaving Art and me standing in the sudden silence, bathed in the glow of our half-finished masterpieces. We were both relieved and weirdly emboldened. The law had seen our work and deemed it too ridiculous to be illegal. We had our first unofficial fans. The project wasn't just compliant. It was, in its own way, police-approved. We got back to work, a new spring in our step. Gary's jowls needed to be perfect. The universe, it turns out, has a flair for the dramatic. Our 14-day deadline was set to expire on a Sunday. As fate would have it, that Sunday was also the date of the annual Maple Creek Estates Summer Kickoff BBQ, a mandatory fun event where residents were expected to mingle, make small talk, and pretend to enjoy Carol Littman's ambrosia salad. The BBQ was always held on the community green, a patch of grass directly across the street from my house. The timing wasn't just good, it was perfect. It was poetic. Our last night of work was a frenzy of artistic focus. Art and I moved with the silent, efficient energy of a pit crew. We were exhausted, running on coffee and the pure, uncut adrenaline of imminent victory. With a tiny pair of bonsai shears, I put the final, perfect glint of malice in Carol's leafy eyes. With a delicate touch of his trimmer, Art perfected the helmet-like sheen of Brenda's hair. We stood back around 3 a.m., our work finally done. They were horrifying. They were beautiful. They were ready. The morning of the BBQ, the neighborhood was abuzz. I watched from my window as people set up folding tables and fired up grills, the air filled with the scent of charcoal and simmering resentment. All eyes, however, kept drifting to my house. The giant, ominous tarps still shrouded my front yard in mystery. The rumor mill, undoubtedly churned into a butter of speculation by Carol, was in overdrive. Dave texted me. "Heard you're putting in a koi pond. Carol says they're not on the approved list of water features." I texted back, something like that. At precisely 12:30 p.m., as the BBQ was reaching critical mass, Brenda Shankman stepped up to the gazebo in the center of the green. She tapped the microphone, preparing to deliver her opening remarks, which were sure to be a thrilling recap of the latest mulch regulations. That was my cue. I walked out my front door, my heart a frantic drum solo in my chest. I didn't walk to the party. I walked to the edge of my lawn, to the corner of the main tarp. I could feel every eye in the neighborhood on me. I looked across the street and made direct eye contact with the board. Brenda, Gary, and Carol were standing together, a phalanx of beige disapproval. I gave them a small, polite smile. And then, with one smooth, theatrical motion, I pulled the rope. The tarps, rigged by Art for a quick release, fell away. They collapsed to the ground in a single, dramatic whoosh, like a curtain rising on opening night. There they were, my magnum opus. 3 perfect, unmistakable, verdant portraits, shimmering in the midday sun. On the right, carved from the mighty boxwood, was Brenda, her permanent scowl aimed directly at the street, a silent guardian against joy and non-regulation mailboxes. On the left, sculpted from the privet hedge by the driveway, was Gary, his jowly face a symphony of disappointment, forever judging every car that passed. And by the mailbox, her head tilted in that familiar, condescending pose, was Carol, her smarmy smile immortalized in 1,000 tiny leaves. They were masterpieces of horticultural spite, and they were glorious. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound in Maple Creek Estates was the gentle sizzle of burgers on a grill. The entire neighborhood, dozens of people holding paper plates and red plastic cups, just stared. They were frozen in a state of collective slack-jawed disbelief. The reaction came in waves. First, there was confusion. People squinted, their heads tilting. You could see the gears turning. That looks familiar. Is that? No, it couldn't be. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. "What the heck am I looking at?" someone whispered. "Is that Brenda's hair?" And then the dam broke. It started with my neighbor, Dave. He'd been in the middle of taking a bite of a hot dog. His eyes went wide with dawning realization. He let out a choked snort, which erupted into a full-throated, cathartic belly laugh. He doubled over, clutching his stomach, tears streaming down his face. His laughter was infectious. A woman near the potato salad table let out a giggle, then clapped a hand over her mouth as if trying to contain it. A guy by the grill pointed, his mouth agape, before bursting into a guffaw. Within 30 seconds, the quiet, polite atmosphere of the BBQ had been replaced by a wave of uproarious, unrestrained laughter. Half the neighborhood was in hysterics. This wasn't just funny. For them, it was a revolution. These were people who had been issued citations for leaving their trash cans out for an extra hour, who had been forced to repaint their front doors because their shade of white was too eggshell, not ivory. They had all suffered under the board's tyrannical reign. And in that moment, seeing their oppressors immortalized as ridiculous, angry plants, they were all free. This wasn't just my victory, it was theirs. Meanwhile, the subjects of my art were having a decidedly different experience. Carol Littman let out a horrified, theatrical gasp. She put a hand to her chest, her face pale, as if she'd been physically wounded by a privet hedge. "Oh, my heavens," she whispered. Gary Peterman's face turned a shade of mottled crimson that clashed violently with his pastel yellow polo shirt. He sputtered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He raised a trembling, accusatory finger towards my house, but no words came out. And Brenda, oh Brenda. Her face, a canvas of mild irritation just moments before, became a mask of pure, distilled fury. It was a terrifying sight. If looks could kill, my lawn would have been a smoldering crater. Her eyes narrowed to slits. She dropped the microphone she was holding. It hit the ground with a piercing shriek of feedback that cut through the laughter like a siren. Without a word, she began to march. Not walk, not stroll. She marched across the green, her power-walking form now a full-blown combat advance. Gary and a near-tears Carol fell in line behind her, her loyal, sputtering generals. They were coming for me. This was no longer a horticultural dispute. This was a declaration of war. As they crossed the street, I could hear snippets of conversation from the delighted crowd. "Oh my God, he even got her smug little smile. It's uncanny. Look at the jowls on Gary. It's a perfect likeness." "This," a man I'd never spoken to declared to his wife, "is the greatest thing to happen to this neighborhood since they paved the cul-de-sac." I stood my ground on my porch, a nervous but resolute smile on my face. The Battle of Boxwood Hill was about to begin. The trio of fury stomped across my lawn, crushing the perfectly manicured fescue beneath their sensible shoes. The entire party had now migrated to the edge of the street, turning my front yard into an amphitheater for the best suburban drama they'd ever witnessed. Brenda stopped 5 feet from my porch, her hands planted on her hips, her body vibrating with rage. Gary and Carol flanked her, looking like two angry, defeated gargoyles. "Maxwell!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain. "What is the meaning of this?" I took a calm sip of the lemonade I'd brought out with me. "Brenda," I said, my voice even and pleasant. "I'm not sure what you mean. I'm just enjoying the BBQ from my porch. Great turnout this year." "Do not play dumb with me," she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at her own leafy effigy. This is a mockery. This is a direct violation of... She seemed to be searching for the right bylaw, her internal rulebook spinning like a broken Rolodex. "A violation of what, exactly?" I asked politely. "I received your letter. I have it right here." I pulled the folded cream-colored letter from my back pocket. It said my previous topiaries were, and I quote, "inappropriate and suggestive." It instructed me to retrim them into a standard, non-offensive geometric shape. So, I complied. "Standard shape?" Gary finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. You made us into bushes." "I made people out of bushes, Gary," I corrected him gently. "And last I checked, the human form is a very standard shape. We see them every day. Are you suggesting there's something inappropriate about the human form? Because that seems like a whole other issue for the committee to tackle." Gary's mouth opened and closed again. Checkmate. Carol, seeing her burly protector flummoxed, jumped in. "That one is looking at my house," she wailed, pointing at her topiary doppelganger. It's spying on me. I feel threatened by a plant." "Carol," I said with profound patience, "it's a shrub. It doesn't have eyes. It's not looking at you, it's just facing that direction. It's a very neutral, non-offensive sculpture of a person, as per your committee's request." It was in that moment that I saw the horrifying realization dawn on Brenda's face. The trap. She had walked right into my beautiful, leafy trap. Her power, her entire identity, was built on the unshakable foundation of the HOA rulebook. She lived and died by the bylaw. But I had used her own weapon against her. There was no rule in the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association covenants, conditions and restrictions that prohibited trimming a bush into the likeness of a person. For her to fine me, she would have to officially declare, in writing, that the sculptures were offensive because they were of them. And if she did that, she would not only be admitting to the entire neighborhood that she recognized herself in that furious, leafy scowl, but she would also be opening the HOA up to unimaginable levels of public ridicule. How could she argue that a sculpture of herself was out of harmony with the community aesthetic without sounding like a complete and utter tyrant? Her face went from red-hot rage to an icy, pale fury. She knew she was beaten, but she couldn't accept it. "This is not over, Maxwell," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "I will find a rule. I will fine you into oblivion. I will have my husband, who is a lawyer." "Is he a topiary lawyer, Brenda?" I asked, my voice still light. A few snickers erupted from the crowd of onlookers. She shot them a look that could freeze fire. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off, her two lieutenants trailing miserably in her wake. The battle was over. The laughter from the crowd swelled again, this time mixed with applause. Dave gave me a thumbs up from across the street. I had faced the dragon in its lair, armed with nothing but its own rule book, and I had won. The story of the Battle of Boxwood Hill became an instant local legend. By Monday, a photo of my front yard was on a local news blog. By Tuesday, it had been picked up by a national aggregator site. The headline was always some variation of, "Disgruntled homeowner gets perfect revenge on HOA by turning bushes into board members." My house became a minor tourist attraction for a week. People would drive by slowly, pointing and taking pictures. I was a suburban folk hero. The HOA, facing a PR nightmare of their own making, and a near-total mutiny from the residents, led by a newly emboldened Dave, who was organizing a petition to recall the board, had no choice but to wave the white flag. A few days later, a second cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one was much thinner. Inside was a short, terse letter stating that after a secondary review, the committee had determined my property was now in full compliance. The violation was formally rescinded. There was no apology. There didn't need to be. The silence was victory enough. Weeks later, the hype died down, and life in Maple Creek Estates returned to a new kind of normal. A quieter, less tyrannical normal. The board canceled the next 2 monthly meetings. Gary stopped measuring lawns. Carol's potluck flyers ceased. Brenda was still seen on her power walks, but now she always took a route that avoided Blossom Lane entirely. One cool evening, Art came by. We sat on my porch, drinking a couple of cold beers, admiring our handiwork. The setting sun cast a golden light on the 3 green faces, making them look almost noble in their absurdity. My phone buzzed. It was another email, the 4th one that week, from someone in a different state who had seen my story online. They wanted to know if I took commissions for protest topiaries. Art was seriously considering coming out of retirement to start a new, highly specialized landscaping firm. "You know," Art said, taking a sip of his beer and gazing critically at Brenda's effigy. "Looking at it now, I think I made her left eyebrow just a little too arched. It gives her a hint of surprise. We should fix that. She never looks surprised, only angry." I smiled and looked at the 3 leafy guardians of my lawn. "No," I said. "Let's leave it. It's not supposed to be a perfect copy. It's art. I looked at my friend, the hedge wizard who had helped me win an unwinnable war. It's about capturing the essence. He chuckled, a low, satisfied rumble. The essence of the beast. Exactly. We clinked our bottles together, the sound a small, happy chime in the quiet evening air. We were two co-conspirators, two artists, enjoying the view of our beautiful, spiteful, and perfectly compliant garden. And it was, without a doubt, the most harmonious the neighborhood had ever looked.